everyone. Today we have our another new episode. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith. We will discuss on governance of the metaverse. This is very important and especially for our youth community. This is very important topic and we can learn this interesting aspect from Professor David Smith. Professor David Smith, what you want to share with our audience?
Well, Dr. Sharif, thank you for letting me be on your show about this today. The metaverse, the governance in the metaverse, though, Dr. Sharif, is not just for the youth community. It has impacts across all the commercial sector, all the government sector, and the nonprofit sector as well, because of the fundamental changes that the metaverse will bring into the internet and how organizations must react to them and whether um, the governance that is in place for the current internet is adequate for the metaverse, or whether we need to look at changing that governance and building it. And you know, part of the thing as you begin to look at governance is really a framework in context to the metaverse that prioritizes how do you prevent harm? How do you do risk mitigation? How do you do commerce? How do you look at equity? How do you look at interoperability? And how do you begin to put standards in place in a brand new development area that standards seem to be maybe would hold it back? And there's much debate on the metaverse right now going on. It is part of the latest rage, but we're beginning to hear many dissenters to it as well because of the high hardware demands it has, the high graphical demands it has, and the fact that you have to have a fairly large internet pipeline that's very stable. And as we know from doing these broadcasts, that's not always true for many. Uh, but the metaverse, like the Web 2.0, and even going back to Gopher and Archie and some of the predecessors before the World Wide Web was even established, uh, it will be created and operated mostly by business for profit. Even though you will have education concerns, government, uh, nonprofits, and other connected to it, the real driver will be the businesses that use it. And many are concerned about the cultural, their social, the economic implications of the metaverse, as well as the fact that for the commercial sector, many of the very large big tech companies and many of the state actors, the government organizations, the large NGOs, uh, might exert unreasonable influence on it that would be counter counter to their business. And it's really an opportunity to look at how to go back and begin to put in place new governance structures, take the best practice from existing governance structures, and put it over into a new way to kind of knit together a an effective metaverse governance framework that sets the standards, makes laws, make regulations, establish policy, and begins to put in place how to promote other elements that have been surfaced as being challenges in the current internet, such as advocacy, such as digital divide, and also privacy is going to be an extreme big one of the metaverse, privacy and security, because of the changes that are happening in that area. And so it's really one that says, how do we in this world look out for all those interests and also the interests of the individual, the economic, the civil, and the political activities in the world? They all will be put in place on this new metaverse. And it's hopefully will be an environment where we can go and begin to enrich what we have been doing for so long on the internet today. But we see that the internet has changed dramatically in just the last 24 months with the introduction of the Internet of Things, the Internet of Medical Things, the fact that we're beginning to see robots begin to be used and controlled across the internet. Growth, and I mean explosive growth of artificial intelligence, uh, and on the internet in just really the last 6, 7 months have been tremendous as we see how this happens and what we can do. Um, and we already see that virtual reality, immersive reality, the whole the augmented reality are all beginning to use and beginning to migrate in some of these instances to early application cases on the metaverse. Also, the metaverse brings to market an entirely different gaming environment, and gaming is one of the early drivers of the metaverse. So we can see so much there. The other big thing with the metaverse is it needs to understand it needs to be used on all of our types of devices and the sensors that are in those type of devices. For example, if you look at internet access around the world, even today, the majority of the internet access is not by desktop computers, it's not by notebooks, but it's from smart mobile devices, smartphones. And the metaverse is such a rich 3D environment that many of the smartphones cannot adequately handle it. But yet, that is the way that the majority of people access the internet today. So, how do we use the metaverse in such a way not to disenfranchise those users? And Sharif, particularly if I look in developing nations, the vast majority of developing nations access the internet through their smart devices. And I'm increasingly seeing that here. One of my business partners actually gave up their notebook, and they're only using their smart mobile device now for most of their business. And I think that's a trend you're going to see more and more. But for example, some of the early metaverse applications that do work with mobile phones, they use all their sensors. They use their GPS, they use their camera, they use their microphones. They use devices which are connected to the mobile device either through Bluetooth, WiMAX, Wi-Fi, uh, and others to connect and sense the context of what you're doing. And so they, in essence, turn the phone into a user interface device, the screen, the speaker, and everything to augment how we build our world experience with things like wellness apps, maps, vocal assistance, facial recognition, and even to create new environments and new experiences. I remember back when Pokemon was so popular, and that was an experience built totally around this mobile environment and how it was being used and how those elements can be used with it. That's a lot in one breath there, but that is really when you look at the metaverse and the governance of the metaverse, what is happening and what will be used with that. You know, the metaverse is really set to change how the way people in business communicate and operate and innovative. But one of the challenges of the metaverse is it's so early in its growth that there's going to be many unpredictable ways to that is going to end up being used. And it does have the potential to be disruptive upon many different parts of society in there. And we need to consider, like I said earlier, the interoperability, the privacy, safety, security. And it really is built upon one foot in the past technology, another foot in how can I do things very differently. And it's it's really in its simplest form a persistent virtual environment that can be accessed by all different types of, let me say, extended reality technologies, XR technologies. And it is really part of the digital transformation that we're going through. And, you know, the early people pushing the metaverse believe that the virtual worlds it's creating, the virtual conferences, the virtual gaming worlds, the virtual commerce worlds, the virtual meeting worlds will incorporate not only traditional internet devices but also connected devices. It will be have built on some of the future versions of blockchain and of all the different type of 3D technologies that you see now in augmented reality, extended reality, virtual reality, and others will become part of it. And it has the potential to transform our social and our commercial interactions. And it can change the way people in business communicate and operate. And we're already beginning to see this. Uh, one of the views is that the newest version of Fortnite uh, is has a metaverse version of it that is just already sells almost $3 billion of digital uh, accessories, clothing, and stuff to players. Uh, and that virtual clothing makes it one of the larger clothing sales companies than almost any of the brick and mortar clothing companies. So you can see the trends there are such that. But as the metaverse begins to mature, entire industries can be reshaped by changes in the value chain that the metaverse is going to bring up on it. And particularly because these value changes now are in many instances virtual uh, value chains. So, how do you create? I'm going to use the word assets, but these assets are digital access assets instead of physical assets. How do you create the framework for the digital ownership of these digital assets? How do you create an e-commerce system that can give value and creation to these digital assets? How can you create an e-commerce system that interacts with the currencies of the physical world for what we're doing in the digital world of the metaverse? And quite honestly, there's many people beginning to look at how to put governance structures in place. There's really many competing ones out there uh, because this is a need that is known very strongly. And the technologies for the uh, use in the metaverse are still being developed very fast. But as they become more widespread and more sophisticated, they will bring them with governance questions that are, well, as distinct, as sophisticated and complex as the tools that are being used in themselves. Many of the industry analysts predict that this is going to lead to uh, a whole new era of developing regulations and rules to govern the tech industry, requiring separate rules on top of the general laws of society, the general commerce laws, the general contract laws, and others, uh, to to try to help mitigate the unintended consequences of these new virtual worlds that exist only in the digital domain, and they do not exist in the physical domain. And so it has to begin to have different ways. For example, the harassment laws in the physical domain are well known. Do those same laws and regulations uh, work in the digital domain in the metaverse? And the same type of things, do the physical laws for contracts, do the physical laws for breaches, do the physical laws for theft work in the digital world of the metaverse? And these, I can see many scenarios in place that say they do not. And so that is one of the biggest challenges you have today as we go back and say, what is the governance of this digital metaverse? How do we need to make it work? How can we change these rules? Dr. Sharif, you've heard me on many broadcasts as we've talked about Web 3.0, the metaverse, extended types of augmented reality, and others. I say security, cybersecurity, huge concern. Privacy, it gets even worse under the metaverse than what we have today. And we know these are issues that are driving people crazy and driving companies losing millions and billions of dollars because of challenges with those. But also, we look at it, we need to be mindful that if we're creating up these new virtual worlds, Dr. Sharif, it might become actually a virtual environment for Bangladesh, where you can go and do physical business in Bangladesh, but you also have maybe a virtual Bangladesh. And I can see that the virtual environment of Bangladesh might set up new structures. He knows it might even set up a new government for the virtual metaverse version of Bangladesh. It might set up a new currency that is not the same currency that's in the physical version of Bangladesh. It might even set up a virtual Bangladesh that is 4 times larger than the physical version of Bangladesh. And so you can see that just those type of simple scenarios really require new advances to governance that we haven't seen in the existing internet, and how it can be done. Uh, and the other one is, how do we look at in accessibility? Uh, as I said earlier, it requires very large pipelines for the internet. It requires fairly advanced graphical hardware. Some of the applications so far require um, a lot of computing power, particularly GPUs, which are not in all devices to make it accessible and use. Uh, some of it is we need to look at how can we put industrial standards in place around hardware, around protocols. Uh, and this is expected to be one of the early challenges in accessibility to the metaverse. The One of the things they have done that in the existing internet is there's a group called the World Wide Web Consortium, W3 with the type of standards will apply to product design. They're applied to software. They're applied to the setting up the user interface experience, the user experience, the UI UX. It will be very different in the metaverse than what is today. And also, many people believe that by making these virtual environments interoperable will be one of the defining features of the future metaverse and how it's governed, because it allows users to participate in unified social cultural activities where it can be applied, this interoperability, this governance can be applied to different layers in the metaverse. And those layers are still being defined. They're mostly undefined right now, but it should help us begin to look at how to use what's called the network effects, and how to use the network effects as this pushes forward, uh, to see if we can look at how it can be used. The other thing is that there is ongoing debate now in part of the technology community is whether there is a principle of antitrust policy for the metaverse that needs to be put in place, and whether antitrust in the metaverse world, the digital world, should be applied as it is in the physical world. And that has a wide-reaching impact for it, because if you cannot uh, use the metaverse for commercial purposes and have commerce happen with it, that will slow down the adoption of the metaverse. Because, like I said before, the commercial companies, the for profit companies, are really the major driver of the uptake of and development of this type of technology. And today, the whole global rules of contracts, smart contracts that work in the metaverse is still unclear. You know, if I create a new token and let's call it the WTEF token, a new type of cyber currency. And Sharif, since you're the head of the WTEF token, and you decide you want to abide by a different set of commerce rules for that token, where is that decided? Because if I look at your audience for this broadcast, it's a global audience. So is it under the rules of Bangladesh? Is it under the rules of Brazil? Under the rules of the United States? Under the rules of Africa, of EU, or where? And the governance is still not decided on that. And see, if I'm creating a virtual world, I can create a virtual currency too. I can create virtual governments. I can do these things and set up rules that are different than the rules that are in the physical world, theoretically. And that's where this new governance structure for the metaverse has to get really defined and begin to put in place new rules to handle that. And I mean, I can keep going on some of these issues, but Dr. Sharif, I want to just pause for a moment and see, or am I answering the questions that you would like me to answer? And what are the other areas that I should cover as we go? And to also let me pause 1 second and get a drink to refresh my throat.
Yeah, definitely. This is very interesting. This is very interesting. I'm sure our audience can learn a lot of interesting aspect from today's dialogue, specifically when we discuss about governance. And right now, emerging economy, country like Bangladesh, India, we are also working on good governance. So, how different criteria we can fulfill through this metaverse, or how we apply this metaverse, Bangladesh in metaverse. So, if you give us some example and some strategy for our country, it may be helpful for us.
Well, to give you an idea for Bangladesh, it's interesting, is that you begin to look at Bangladesh as a country. It traditionally has had the ability to control everything within its border. And even when the traditional internet came out, there were challenges with pulling countries like Bangladesh, countries from Africa, and others onto it because the culture is so different. The modalities of regulations are so different. Even the way contracts are done. I'm amazed when I go, for example, and try to do business in the United Kingdom, how their differences of contract laws are totally different than what we see here in the United States. And so I have to, as do a contract, for example, just in the UK, I have to look at different clauses. I have to look at different ways. Where do we want the laws to be interpreted? Bangladesh is going to be the same way. Do we want those laws interpreted in Bangladesh, in the United States, in EU, in the PAC U Federation? Do we want them regulated by people in Geneva? Do we want the UN to set up a regulatory group to regulate the metaverse? Do we need yet another way to look at it? Uh, if the Bangladesh metaverse, for example, encompasses most of that part of Asia and Eurasia, how do your contracts work? How do your laws work? How do your regulations work? How do the banking laws work? What type of currency must we step up and do? If I in Bangladesh, if I'm the government, I say I'm going to move a lot of my government functions to the metaverse where people can interact using their avatars and where we can have avatars driven by artificial intelligence. Do I need as many people in the government? Do I need as many buildings in the government? Uh, can I replace people with 3D artificial intelligence driven avatars to answer many of the common needs of government? Do I really need to go see a person to fill out a passport application? Do I need to go and see a real person to go and uh, get a driver's license, to get a license to do business, to get a permit to build other materials, to change property ownership? Do I need the government to go do that in person, or can I do that with an avatar in the metaverse who is not even a real person, but is using artificial intelligence to do those things? Sharif, those are what is possible in the metaverse. Uh, and I'm not for sure how, uh, for example, Bangladesh would react to that. You're there and understand the culture. Would that be a big shift for your audience? Or do your audience see that as a natural evolution of moving to a more complex virtual world that can work with the physical world? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Excellent. I believe a country like Bangladesh, India, we are very progressive. Our government actually trying to develop smart Bangladesh. So when we love to develop this smart Bangladesh, this kind of strategy, like governance of the metaverse, this is definitely essential, and we have to adapt. In terms of cryptocurrency or digital currency, I saw that Bangladesh bank, Central Bank of Bangladesh, they have some reservation. Still, they are observing. But different school, college, different lab, I saw that they are adapting this metaverse strategy. But definitely, we need better internet connections, and it may be helpful. And I already invite you in a big conference in India next week, 27, 28, and 29. In India, there is a very big conference, actually, 1,500 software companies. They develop inside India, and now they're collaborating with the global communities. So that is the way that we can work together, and we can develop the different kind of like technology, and we can develop better communities, specifically the business communities. But your strategy, your guideline may be helpful, because long time with a different topic, with a different issues, you are guiding World Talent Economy Forum, and definitely you are our board of advisors. So what do you think? This we saw in the tech industries, many technology come, and sometimes they become successful, sometimes they fail. So metaverse still, I think that maybe it need more time to expand. Do you think that country like Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, or Malaysia should adapt this kind of technology as fast as possible?
Well, Sharif, I'm not for sure if it's as fast as possible, but it
Mhm.
should be experimenting with it, beginning to use it where it makes sense, particularly as I look at the commercial world. But even the government role, we're seeing great experiments with it around the globe. And, we've talked about some of the regulations and things. There, there's a real interesting one I've been tracking in Europe. and it's called the Europe's Digital Services Act. And it is their attempt to try to bring governance to the metaverse. And it's not a bad model as you begin to look at the complexity of the services, like you were just talking about as well. Um, if I begin to look at the countries you name, though, and as I begin to look at India versus Bangladesh versus Thailand versus Malaysia versus Vietnam versus South Korea, for example, all of the cultures in those are so very, very different. And even the context of how some of them conduct business is very different. You know, when I have been doing work in Thailand, I understand that the way they work there is extremely different than the way I do work in the United States. I mean, I loved it. I was doing a project there. We were in a meeting, and I was asked, gee, over lunch, can you talk to a few of our folks about how you look at the future? I'm going, sure, we can do that while we're eating. We go downstairs, they take me into a room, and there's probably 300 people sitting in chairs for me to have a small discussion with them about how to look at the future. So instead of a discussion over lunch, it became a live presentation. And talking to the macro, they says, "Oh, that's common." Well, in the United States, I would have to take hours of prepping to be able to do that, and instead of having to do it on the fly. And and that's some of the types of differences that the metaverse are going to highlight even more. You know, I can easily in the metaverse pull together a crowd of not just hundreds but of thousands of people in a notice and have those type of things happen. And that is going to be one of the very interesting challenges is the scale of what you can do and the reach of what you can do. I can with one click of a button say I'm going to do a business transaction in all of those countries we just talked about. And again, what are the privacy differences? What are the cultural differences? I know when I've been in India versus South Korea, or when I've been in Thailand and or Japan even, the cultural approaches to doing business are so very different. And how can we do that? And Dr. Sharif, I love the conference you have coming up. Unfortunately, I have to be in Dallas on that Saturday night before it. In the flight to the conference, and there is 26 hours of flight time and connection time. So I'd probably be arriving just about the time it's over. Um, but I would love to be parts of it virtually, even if I can, because I believe
Yes,
this is important for your region and what is being done. I particularly would love to be part of your Tesla conference coming up, maybe even in person, because
yes,
as you know by our discussion of him last Friday, there is so much we can learn and apply in how it is today. And some of the insights, even today, we're seeing people going back and studying his works. But coming back to the metaverse, it really is an environment where there's a dilemma, and particularly in the topic for today of governance. And it's the dilemma of centralized governance versus distributed governance. And we saw this changing over the last decade on the internet. The early days of the internet, it was all controlled by ICANN, which was controlled by the United States, since the internet really originated in the United States and spread out globally. But then there was a movement, I believe it was under President Bush here in the United States, uh, to really make the governance of the internet more international. And that's what's happened since then is ICANN has now been supplemented with international groups beginning to look at how to regulate the internet. We're going to have the same type of thing in the metaverse. And you're going to see this government change because there are
Yes.
increasingly proposed alternate governance standards and structured by many of the people who are proposing the Web 3.0, the advocates. They're arguing that users, rather than the government, rather than executives, rather than regulatory uh, uh, leadership, should have the decision-making authority within the metaverse and even within companies. They're saying that, Sharif, it's like in Malaysia, in Bangladesh, you have a board of directors that control companies, and you have a leadership of C-suite people. You know, a CEO, a president, chief financial officer, chief technology officer control the companies. Well, this group of advocates is saying in the metaverse that should not happen. In the metaverse, it should be the users of the products of that company that control the company and not the leadership like we have today. I don't know about you, Sharif, but I know very few companies today who would risk the future of the company on just letting users control the operation of the company versus having the leadership of the company change it. The same advocates are proposing that for government, where you no longer have elected officials, but you use the metaverse with a governance structure to actually run countries. Uh, Sharif, I don't know if your prime minister would react well to that, or to your boards of your parliament and things, if they would react well to that. But those are some of what's being proposed for the governance of this metaverse. Is this new alternative government structures that are put in place? And what's interesting about this is kind of manifesting itself as decentralized autonomous organizations. They're being known as DAOs today, which issue users blockchain tokens, uh, and they will give the owners the economic and governance rights. And you see, that is one of the places where the biggest debates are right now around the metaverse. In the fact that is it really a truly digital metaverse, or do the rules of the physical world extend into the digital metaverse rules? And what happens for recourse? What happens when this group of people setting the rules in the metaverse get out of hand? Uh, who's responsible? How can a healthy decentralized organization be one that produces rules that support the entire group of users and not just the vast majority? And we've seen that. And today we still have more questions than answers in the metaverse, because the metaverse governance is such a multifaceted challenge. It really is a system challenge, not across just technologies, but across all the other elements of regulatories, of privacy, of security, of commerce, of how do we build ways to promote the rules of law that we've had for thousands of years in the physical world. How do we put those rules of law and regulations in there? You know, what will be different? What are the trade-offs between interoperability, privacy, safety, security, and commerce? How are we going to neatly manage those in the metaverse? I don't think we have good answers yet. We have people say, well, we can define smart contracts that we all can be done. But if you look at some of the discussions on this has been such wide ranging. Both the United Nations and then the World Economic Forum and at Davos and others, they're beginning to try to look at how do we address these governance issues? What are the economic opportunities, the regulatory frameworks? Do we need to make technology choices? Do we need to put technology standards in place, or do we let it just be in the way we talk about here, a wild west, where there are no rules, where there are no uh, requirements, are there no standards? How do we develop principles for governing this metaverse, and do they need to be holistic, or can they be more local and applied there? I wish I had some of these answers, because this has such a very interesting way. Some people also say, though, Sharif, that the metaverse is just a phase, because we're not going to have the global internet connectivity that you and I both talked about earlier. We're not going to be able to go to a digital currency that everyone can agree upon. I mean, how do we convert between all the different digital currencies to all the different physical world currencies? Or do we need to do something like go and create a new way, a new currency that's a global currency? Well, I don't see that happening, because governments use their central banks and their currency to help promote the stability of the nations. For example, in the United States here, we've seen our central bank changing our interest rates over 12 times in the last year to try to not have the United States go into a recession. We're seeing changes this week because of the bank failure of Silicon Valley Bank in California, and then the bank failures in UK and others as a result of that. Um, and we've seen the governments put together ways to manipulate the currency, to pull other stakeholders together, to put a common type of currency in place, to have banks not fail. Well, how would we do that in the metaverse? What currency would we use? What digital currencies will we have to convert real currencies into a new type of super digital currency that has more weight, that governments could work on and regulate within themselves? But one of the goals of digital currency in the metaverse is to have no one country control it. Well, you know, for what our government did here in propping up the banks, what our government did here with making adjustments in interest rates and things to help not go into a recession like we would in the past, how does that change in the metaverse, Sharif? That is one of the big questions I think we don't know the answers to. And I have a feeling that even your government in Bangladesh would react non-favorably to having one currency worldwide, to having a governance and a government that is a worldwide government that is separate than your government in Bangladesh. Um, and those are some of what's being proposed with metaverse governance. So, Sharif, you can see there's a wide range of what's going on to it, and there's not clear winners yet. And I can see the concerns, but there's this vast requirement to set up new governance in the metaverse, and it's just one that I think it's going to take a lot of work to be successful with.
Thank you. Specifically, when we discuss about metaverse, young community they have a lot of interest about metaverse. So, what is your advice, uh, and how they can improve their skills, and how they can economically involve with this process?
Well, there's a lot of ways they can do it. I mean, one of the neat things that's happening in the metaverse is we're already seeing innovation. We're seeing governments establish municipal services and embassies in the metaverse to provide citizen services. We're seeing entrepreneurial innovators who are creating virtual neighborhoods and selling digital virtual homes in them, which is kind of interesting. And we're seeing some, and you've heard me and Rob and others talk on your program about digital twins. Is the metaverse the perfect place to do digital trends? And can we use the metaverse to help simulate and do scenarios of our commerce, of our digital factories? We know we're seeing metaverse like programs being used to look at how can we optimize factories? How can we do it? But again, you know, how can it be secure? How can it be trusted? How can it be portable? What are the enforcement metaverses? But digital trends in the metaverse are a new mode, but they have uh, the same challenges we have in today's physical world and today's virtual world. So for uh, today's entrepreneurs, for today's governments dipping their toes in this and others, uh, they need to help make sure that the governance in the metaverse is an open environment, and it needs to have interoperable models that needs to still be developed. And this is a place for a lot of innovation, particularly for some of the developing nations, because of their needs being more unique. That there will be these interoperable models of the real and virtual world modes of interactions. And how can we look at an interoperable model uh, for interactions and transition and transactions that's common across the multiverse destinations? And how can your entrepreneurs, how can the universities begin to develop new models? And these have to be interoperable models globally that guide the capture and the use of personal identifiable information, digital rights management, uh, safety, security, uh, and the rules of law, the rules of commerce uh, that work in the digital metaverse world like they are in our physical world. And and they must also help guide the adoption of portable identifiers throughout the metaverse to help us uh, manage identity, rights, roles, permissions. Um, you know, can I, in the real world, for example, Sharif, can I be David here? But in the metaverse world, can I have 20 other identities? And how do we determine that in the physical world, my identity, David, is similar to my virtual identities in the metaverse? You know, can I in the metaverse say that I'm a medical doctor? Can I in the metaverse say I'm a lawyer? Can I in the metaverse say I'm the ruler of a country and I should have the same power and authority and recognition as say, for example, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, because I create a virtual country in the metaverse? And how do those play? But you can see, Sharif, that the possibilities are endless. And that's why the opportunities for entrepreneurship, the opportunities for research, the opportunities for banding together consortia, groups of people to develop these frameworks. If I were particularly in the developing world today, I might want to take the lead of pulling together a federation, a consortia of emerging countries to work as a rule, as a group, as a body, to make sure that the emerging governance rules of the metaverse take our interests into account. And that would be one of my advices is the metaverse has no boundaries like countries do. The metaverse has no central governance authority. And how can particularly the developing world work to use that to their advantage and to become one of the leaders in helping forge those changes, and particularly the part of the world that where you are located, Sharif, because it has less of the geopolitical activities happening like you see in Europe today with the Russian Ukraine war and how that affects everything there. Um, and it doesn't have some of the geopolitical impacts of what we're seeing between China and Taiwan right now, and some of its impacts in a the whole environment up around Taiwan with Japan and others, and the North Korea disruptions. So your group of stakeholders there, Sharif, in not only Bangladesh but the other countries around you, are ideally suited to, if they can work together, to have a leadership role in helping define what the future governance of the metaverse can mean for their countries and for them as individuals and for their companies. So, Sharif, that's part of my advice for you.
Thank you. This is excellent dialogue, and hopefully through this process, our audience can learn many interesting things. And I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government agency, corporations, and academy. Through this process, definitely they can learn new things. Professor David Smith, what is your concluding remarks for today's sessions, and how we can improve economically more through this process and take more initiative like this kind of thing.
Well, Sharif, thank you again for letting me be part of this. My concluding remarks are really this, is that the term governance covers many different frameworks, and they're frameworks that promote trust and cooperation among users and providers in the technical, the commercial, the civil, the social, the political, the legal, and really even the personal rights across the digital environment is so important because it does touch on all those aspects. And part of what we need to see in this metaverse is a transparent metaverse governance that will help billions and billions of strangers who are going to use the metaverse cooperate on the type of housekeeping they're going to do with each other, the way we can do business. And it needs to be a governance framework that considers all voices and assures really thoughtful legal innovation. And it needs government regulatory frameworks and laws that respect and adopt with the innovations we're going to see here. And privacy is going to be a huge one. Cybersecurity is going to be one. And as we look at internet governance, those have been met with very mixed results and not really very good yet. And when we throw into this metaverse environment sensors that others can use to observe us, and how we can be collected and aggregated online and see our activities. You know, the use of facial recognition in airports and on streets and things already has challenges. Let's throw that on top of our avatars in the metaverse, and what can we do? And we're seeing those. We're seeing laws put in place governing that, like the Europe's EU's GDPR, things like in the United States the CCPA and others on what we're going to do, and and really producing this governance framework and to coordinate the interoperable models of the real and virtual world modes of not just interaction, but our transactions, our ways to do commerce, the way to say, if I get a medical degree in the metaverse in this one part of it, will it translate to other physical world environments? If I get a college degree in the metaverse, is that same as a college degree from a physical university. And what we're going to see, though, is that trying to answer these questions and trying to see if the metaverse can be built to have what many people believe is the significant impact it can have. Is this the opportunity of our lifetime, or is this just another passing uh, trend, technology trend that will be here, and very soon we'll have another model out there that we have to do? And those, to me, that is one of the big opportunities and challenges of the metaverse. And hopefully we can work collaboratively using our own group intelligence and work globally to establish this governance for the metaverse. Uh, and to understand how the metaverse and the real world, the physical world, work together, and do the rules for one apply to the others. That is my challenge I think we're facing with this reef, and that, I believe, is the biggest point I want to leave with you as we talk about the governance. And my concluding remarks is it's a set of challenges with no real answers today, but it's evolving. And let's use our own group intelligence. Let's use our ability to collaborate and drive consensus, but it has to have all the stakeholders at the table. It has to have users. It has to have the commercial companies, large and small. It has to have universities at the table. It has to have the governments uh, at the table of all the different countries where it's being used. And we have to make sure that the infrastructure is not for just a select few, but we can begin to put an infrastructure in place that can be used globally, so we do not have the question of the digital divide like we have debated for many, many years. So, Sharif, I think that's my concluding remarks.
Thank you, Professor David Smith.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor David Smith. This is excellent session, and from these sessions, I'm sure our audience can learn many important aspects for members. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible. Thank you, Professor David. Thank you. Bye bye, and take care.
Thank you, Sharif, and bye, y'all.